In the garden, Harry was suddenly pelted on all sides by snowballs. They were not very hard, and they didn't hurt, but they surprised him. There was no one in the field. He was being attacked by a phantom snowball thrower. "What are you doing?" cried Mr. Brolly in amazement. "It's a snowball fight," said the computer. "All small boys like a snowball fight." "Only with other small boys," said Mr. Brolly. "Well, how was I to know?" said the computer. "It doesn't say anything about that in my data bank." It wiped the picture from the screen and hummed quietly to itself. "I've made him something he'll really like," it said at last. "Something you really would find at the North Pole." "What is it?" asked Mr. Brolly. "A bear," said the computer. "A bear?" shouted Mr. Brolly. "I must go to him at once," and strode from the room. A moment later, he was heard crashing about in the big cupboard in the kitchen, crying, "Where are my snowshoes? Where's my woolly hat?" "What a fuss," said the computer, still humming quietly to itself. A moment later, a large parcel shot from the slot of the computer, and it fell on top of the little cloud and almost flattened him. The little cloud bore up bravely under the weight of the parcel. He knew that it was for Harry. "Blippi!" cried the little cloud, and into the snowstorm he went. Harry had pitched his tent in the middle of the garden. He had untied some of the bundles. There was a flask of hot soup and a mug. There was a woolly hat and a pair of mittens. The tent itself had been one of the larger bundles, and one mysteriously shaped parcel had been a pair of huge snowshoes. Harry had tried them on, but they were much too big. All around him lay the snow-covered garden, which seemed to go on forever. As he gazed, he held the mug of soup in both hands. The warm woolly hat flopped down over his ears, but a cold tear ran down his cheek. Comforting though hot soup and woolly hats may be, they're not a friend to sit by your side. So Harry was very glad to see the little cloud coming towards him, carrying the parcel. "Oh, Cloud!" he cried happily. "Big box," said the little cloud, dropping the parcel at Harry's feet. He felt very proud of himself, as well he might. "Cloud!" said Harry, for these two words were the first real words the little cloud had spoken. But then, "Oogle," it said with a sigh, and flopped over Harry's knee and went to sleep. Inside the weather house, Mr. Brolly was telling Mrs. Brolly all about the bear. "A bear?" cried Mrs. Brolly. "A positive brute of a beast," said Mr. Brolly. "But I shall capture him, Mrs. B." "I have no doubt of it, Brolly," said Mrs. Brolly. "But is that quite the right equipment for catching a bear?" "It is my only equipment," said Mr. Brolly, wearing his hat tied to his head with one of Mrs. Brolly's stockings and with tennis rackets on his feet, being unable to find either his woolly hat or his snowshoes. Over his shoulder he carried a large butterfly net. "Oh, Brolly, what a hero you are," said Mrs. Brolly, watching him go. "An artist and a hero. That's my Brolly." In the tent, scarcely anything could be seen, for the thickly falling snow hid what little light remained. So the little cloud made a sparkling thunderbolt, which brightened the tent up wonderfully. As Mr. Brolly made his way over the garden, there, thrown against the wall of the tent, was the shadow of a huge bear. "My boy, help is at hand!" cried Mr. Brolly, and without a thought for his own safety, he burst into the tent. There, by the light of the thunderbolt, he saw Harry and the little cloud, gazing at the present from the computer. A stout toy bear with a very black nose and eyes and a pleasant smile. "Mr. Brolly!" said Harry in surprise. "I came to rescue you," said Mr. Brolly. He felt very foolish and didn't quite know what to do with his butterfly net. "Dear Mr. Brolly," said Harry, "I'm going to finish the expedition," he said. Good man, said Mr. Brolly. Keep warm. Mr. Brolly, on his way back to the weather house, turned and peered into the falling flakes, but could see nothing at all. Keep going, my boy, he called. You can make it. My bold, brave hero, cried Mrs. Brolly, when at last he staggered into the weather house. But Mr. Brolly just sighed. I'm worried about the boy, he said. He still has 2 bundles left on the sled, said Mrs. Brolly. 2 useful bundles. Oh, dearest, said Mr. Brolly, what a comfort you are. He pressed the smiley button, and together they gazed at the picture which the computer put up on the screen. And there they were, Harry carrying a flag and wrapped in the patchwork quilt. Then, as Mr. and Mrs. Brolly watched, Harry planted the flag. For all expeditions to the pole end with the planting of a flag, as does this tale.